Okay. Understood. As long as you can see and hear us and, we can see and hear you.
Yeah.
All right. I'll just give it 15 to 20 seconds and then we'll get started. Hi, Madhura.
Hi, Amulya. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Good, good. So nice to be here.
Hi, Sanya. Smita here. Hi.
Yeah.
How are you? Good, great. Good to see you. All right. Hi, Madhura.
Hi, Smita. How are you?
I'm good. I'm going to be on a standby in case there is some fluctuation in internet. I will jump in. So
Thank
all
you.
the 3 panel members, I'm just Amulya just asked me to be as a standby for her today. So, yeah. So I'll put my video and audio off and I'll be there. Yeah.
Sure. Thank you so much. Okay, I guess we can get started. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the monthly knowledge session series held by KelpHR and ILA. We are really excited to have this conversation today. It's a very important and interesting topic. I have a great set of panelists with me, and I will introduce them shortly. The topic for today's discussion is men as survivors of sexual harassment at workplaces and redressal. So before we get into it, I would love to, introduce you to the people who are organizing this session. So first, let's learn a little bit about ILA.
Thank you, Amulya. Yes. Hello, everybody. My name is Madhura. So we run Indian Lawyers Association, a non-profit organization, a platform, networking platform for all the legal professionals across India. And we come together with an intention, objective to strengthen our legal system and make it one of India's best, strongest legal systems. So we operate in a fashion of having local chapters across the country. We have about 70 plus of them currently. And all these chapters add a lot of local unique flavor to how ILA operates in their cities. So we would be very happy to invite each one of you to join on this mission of ILA. And be in each city of India and make it the most vibrant, strongest networks of lawyers across the world, I should say. So with this, I'll hand it over back to Amulya, and I'll catch up with all of you later today or tomorrow over emails. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Madhura. Proud to be associated with ILA. A little bit about KelpHR. KelpHR is a HR consulting and services firm. We work primarily in the spaces of POSH, DEI, and employees assistance programs, which is we are in the space of creating safer, more inclusive and happier workplaces. Our mission is to create 10,000 safe workplaces and 10 million inclusive employees by 2030. And we would love to have you join us on this journey. To kick off the session today, I would really like to introduce the panelists that we have. To go first, let's introduce Anisha. Anisha Shroff is a partner at Strategy Law Partners and heads their Bangalore office. She holds a master's degree in law from Columbia Law School, USA, and is licensed to practice law in India and in New York. She regularly assists companies in formulating their anti-sexual harassment policies and imparts training to employees in relation to sexual harassment at the workplace. Welcome, Anisha. It's great to have you here.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
And let's meet Sanya. Sanya D. Kishwar is an assistant professor at Jindal Global Law School. She's pursuing her PhD from National Law University, Delhi, and holds a master's in law from University of Leeds, UK, and the Pennsylvania State University, USA. She's a senior research associate at Center for Women's Rights and Child Rights Clinic at JGLS. Her areas of research include feminist theories and international human rights law. It's so great to have you here with us, Sanya. Looking forward to our conversation.
Thank you.
And lastly, we have Samarth. Samarth Srinivas is the founder of JK Legal in Bangalore. JK Legal is primarily a litigation law firm, which is into the commercial and criminal litigation, dispute resolution, family law, and medical negligence matters, among others. Samarth holds an LLM in international trade law from the Essex University, United Kingdom. He has also been a mini pupil under Mr. Manjeet Gill, a Queen's Counsel in England. And Samarth actively participates in training corporates in POSH and conducts awareness sessions for employees. Great to have you, Samarth. Welcome.
Glad to be with you. Yeah, hello all.
So, and lastly, I'm your moderator for today. My name is Amulya. I work in the Center of Excellence at KelpHR. I'm really passionate about meaningfully impacting the culture at workplaces, trying to improve and trying to enhance the employee experience. And having said that, let me give you a little bit of introduction to the topic of today's discussion. Like I said earlier, we work primarily in the space of POSH, right? So when we conduct our POSH trainings, we have to first talk about what is the law. We tell people the name of the law, and invariably, there may be someone or the other who asks us a very pertinent question. And that question is this law only for women? And why, right? It's not that I don't have an answer, but at one point, I myself was not satisfied with the answer. And so I decided to dig deeper. I wanted to understand what was the thought process behind this law being so gender specific, right? And what will it, and does it serve us? Does it serve us as progressive societies and progressive workplaces to have a gender specific approach to protecting employees from sexual harassment? So let's start a little before the beginning. Because the title says men as survivors of sexual harassment, right? But are we sure we know who all are falling under this category of men? Let's be clear that gender is different from sex, right? And so if you're talking about legislations that are applicable to specific persons based on their sex, where does gender figure? What is male and what is man, right? Maybe we can have Sanya here to tell us a little bit more about this distinction and to help us understand why there are gender neutral laws in the first place.
Thank you, Amulya. So just talking about the title itself, we see that we have used a word male or men. So there is a distinction between the different terminologies that we utilize to address either the victim or the perpetrator. And all these terminologies in the current scenario, we have enough scholarship to back up the fact, to substantiate the fact that these terminologies should not be restricted to a binary understanding. So both the idea of sex as well as gender is non-binary, and this is not just backed by scholarship but also with scientific evidences and research in this regard. So first, talking about the distinction between sex and gender. Sex is something which is biologically and also medically assigned to a person during the time of their birth. Now, sometimes it might so happen that during the time of their birth, their sex is not easily, identifiable without any without any doubt, without any second thinking. So for instance, if we have intersex persons, it might take a little bit of time for the medical practitioners also to determine what sex they have to assign to that particular infant. Sometimes it might also develop over the years, also a little beyond infancy and a little into towards the onset of adolescence. Nevertheless, the understanding of sex, therefore, is not binary, just as the understanding of gender is not binary. But sex has a lot to do with the medical assignment, with the biological constructs and the hormonal constructs of a person. It absolutely includes the binary understanding, male, female, as well as the other non-binary understandings such as intersex. The other word is gender, which is very different from sex, and it does not have to do with the biological constructs. It does not have to do with the medical assignment. It has a lot to do with the self-identification, with the identification by the person. Now, there can be two types of relations between sex and gender. One is the cis relation and the other is trans. So when a person, for instance, has been assigned a certain sex at the time of their birth, and they identify themselves also with the same gender as to the sex that they have been assigned, and that person is a cisgendered person. On the other hand, if it is otherwise, then the person will be called a transgender person. Now, it doesn't mean that there are only two categories of gender. There are multiple categories, as many as more than 60 categories, roughly speaking, identifications of gender. It also has a lot to do with how a person identifies themselves despite their biological, hormonal, and medical constructs. Apart from that, we also have gender representation, a way through which a person, even though they are identifying themselves as a particular gender, they have been assigned a certain sex, the way they want to portray themselves, the way they want to reflect themselves, that's a different idea overall. But nevertheless, when we are using the term men, we are not only referring to the binary idea of the sex of the person being that of a male. We are including trans men, we are including intersex persons who might or might not be undergoing sex reassignment surgery, might be in the first stage, initial stage, or might be towards the end stage of the sex reassignment surgery. We are also referring to people who might identify themselves as male. So that is a clarification with regards to what we mean when we say men as survivors of sexual harassment at workplace.
Thank you so much for that comprehensive summary, Sanya. I think from what you're saying, I understand that in order to come within this category of the discussion that we are having, there is an aspect of identifying as such, right? Regardless of the sex characteristics that one might possess, it is how one chooses to identify, or one wishes to identify, which may be different from the sex that they were assigned. And I also understand that assignment of sex at the time of birth may not have been the correct one in some cases, in a sense, right? Because people may start to feel differently, and they may start to feel like they're not in the right body, or they did not get assigned the right sex. So these are all possibilities. Sex and gender lie on a spectrum, and especially gender is more of a social construct. These relate more to the roles that we may play in society, and yeah, I think we'll come back to this aspect, right? That gender relates so much to the roles that we play in society, because I believe that even the reason that we don't talk so much, or we don't platform this issue of men being the victims of harassment, is again because of the role that they're expected to play in society, which is that they cannot be a victim, right? And I think that is again something that we should address, that they're not allowed to feel victimized in a sense. So I just want to stay with you here, because I know that this is the subject of your PhD research as well. So if you could throw some light on why it is that we went with a gender-specific law, right? If you can share a little bit about why, because there are countries where there are gender-neutral laws which pertain to sexual harassment, right? So what is it about having a gender-specific law? How does that help?
Absolutely. So just picking up from your point, there are as many as 77 countries which have gender neutral laws for protection of people working in people in a workplace. But nevertheless, India, of course, is not one of them. That is why we are here for this discussion. To answer your question, why this law was made gender specific, we have to look back at the very pertinent case that was decided by the Supreme Court, Vishakha versus the state, the Vishakha case, in which we often use the term Vishakha guidelines. It is from the case which we derived from. But what actually was the issue in the case, if we look at the whole incident that happened with Bhavri Devi,
Yes.
who was working as a Sathin, who had the task of preventing child marriages in a village. She was working towards her role, and some people opposed her, and she was gang raped right in front of her husband. Till date, the trial court, the decision in the trial court has not been rendered in her favor, and many of the accused have even died. So justice actually has not been done. But Vishakha, which is an NGO which works towards protecting women, it joined hands with Bhavri Devi to protect her and to speak for her cause, and also for the cause of other women in the workplace who are subject to sexual harassment. And they asked the Supreme Court to issue guidelines and to decide on the matter. The reason was the pressure was there because India at that time had already ratified the Convention on Elimination Against Discrimination of all Elimination of all forms of discrimination against women, or CEDAW as we call it. And when a country ratifies a particular treaty or convention, they have to abide by its norms. And harassment at workplace, of course, leads to discrimination against women. And that is why the Supreme Court gave these guidelines, in which the government was also told to make a law. At that time, the cases that were being reported were mostly the cases which were talking about women being the victims. And that is why we came up with this statute. And it took more than 10 years for the statute to be made. The decision came around in 1990s. It was only in 2013 that we got the statute. Nevertheless, because the issue revolved around the harassment of a woman as well as other women, and the NGO which was asking for this was also a women NGO working for the cause of women. That is exactly why we had this gender-centric statute. Nevertheless, in today's time, we will very well see that, as you talked about the social constructs and the gendered roles that people have been assigned, men are assigned the roles of being the breadwinners of the family, being the ones who would provide for the family, and the ones who are masculine, ones who are strong, and not just physically but emotionally also strong. So the whole perception of men being assigned the tag of victim doesn't go well with the social constructs, and therefore doesn't go well or hand in hand with the gendered norms. That is why we are also not seeing anywhere close to it's almost a decade after the law has been passed. We are nowhere close to the discussion of making this whole statute gender neutral. So that's my answer to the question that you asked.
Amazing, amazing. I really appreciate, the breadth and the depth with which you've studied this aspect. Thank you so much for that primer. If I could just add that around the time that the act was being passed, so, when it was still a bill with the parliament in around 2010, there was a parliamentary standing committee report that tabled the issue of gender neutrality in this law. They had even said that, safety at workplace should not be a gendered issue, and that human rights should take precedence over gender. The ministry pushed back, saying that there isn't enough data available to say that that incidents that men are facing is as big a problem as what women are facing, and that's true, right? I mean, while this is the topic for today's discussion, we cannot deny that this is a problem that disproportionately affects women more than men, and this is corroborated with National Crime Record Bureau data. it is typically women who are the victims of sexual harassment. Having said that, and having noted that there was talk around this and that there was a tabling of these important aspects, even at the time that the law was being passed. Anisha, if I could ask you, in the workplace today, in the current workplace scenario that we have, do you think it is serving us to have a gender-specific law? The POSH Act, it says something. I mean, it defines, the aggrieved, the person who can file a complaint as an aggrieved woman, right? So can you tell us a little bit about what the POSH Act says and whether that serves us in the current scenario?
So, like you rightly mentioned, Amulya, the POSH Act is very specific to women. It only covers aggrieved women. And, how, if they are facing sexual harassment at workplace, what are the steps? How can they file a complaint with the internals committee if the organization has more than 10 employees and they need to constitute an internal complaints committee? So how can they lodge a complaint with the internal complaint committee, and how will that complaint be heard? And if the organization is less than 10 employees, then how can they, sort of file a complaint with a local committee that may be available in that area? So it's very specific. It's very gender centric and specific. It only covers aggrieved women. And in today's day and time, when we see more and more women, also because earlier there was a, sense that most of the power vests with men, not many women were working, couple of years or so many years ago. But now we see that shift also, at least power is being shared in terms of both men and women. And whilst I agree that most of the cases, women may be the ones who are affected, but it cannot be said that men are not facing issues of sexual harassment. So there is a need for a gender neutral law to be there, and the law to be made gender neutral, so that even aggrieved men can sort of, get relief under the act. And also, when we're talking about the parliamentary committee report, even if we go back to, in 2011, when this report was being discussed, there was a lot of petition that was filed and, statements that were made that it is not gender friendly. The law is only serving purposes of aggrieved women and only focusing on women per se. And even in the parliamentary report, it was observed that there should be, it could be considered that there will be an enabling provisions wherein sexual harassment against men can be considered, or the company can be directed to sort of record how many cases of sexual harassment against men have happened in their workplace whenever they're filing their annual report. And it also provided for the government to sort of go back and get data and statistics as to how many cases of sexual harassment has happened against men where it's been reported, and if required, remedial measures can be taken. So unfortunately, it's been more than a decade and this has not really been implemented as we see, but there is a dire need to ensure that this act is made gender neutral to protect men also against sexual harassment at workplace.
Right. Yeah. Thank you so much for that take. I completely agree with you. And, I think it's not just corporate offices. I mean, I think we tend to create a divide in our minds between, more of like the blue collar workers and white collar workers. And we may see that maybe there is more equality in the white collar environments. But that's not that further makes it difficult for anyone from the other environments to come forward with their grievance, right? We have to create the safe space so that people can talk about the issues that they're facing. If it is going to be dismissed and trivialized, then people are not going to seek remedies or seek the resolution of their grievances. So thank you so much for adding those points, Anisha. I would just also like to say that in the POSH law, interestingly, the victim's gender is specified as aggrieved woman, right? There have also been case laws, I think Malvika Bhattacharjee in Calcutta High Court, which said that, the respondent can also be a woman, right? So a woman can be victimized by another woman. So there is no specific gender assigned to who the respondent can be. So somewhere it is acknowledging that a woman can commit harassment, right? It's not just saying that women are always the victims of harassment, which is an interesting position to take, because from there, I think we should be able to see that, men can face harassment, whether committed by women or committed by other men, right? So it can go in any number of ways. And in fact, we had another case, I think Anamika versus Union of India. This was not a posh case, but it was a sexual harassment case where she was a trans woman. And she held a ID card, which, assigned her as a woman. And so, she was able to avail the rights under, I think, Section 376. I think, Sanya, if you can correct me if I'm not wrong, I think that was under the rape laws that she got her case was admitted while she was a trans woman, right? If you're aware of this.
Because she was assigned the sex of female.
Yes. Yeah. Great. So this brings us to a very interesting point in the conversation, right? We have talked a little bit about the history. We've talked a little bit about why things are the way they are today, right? But we have also acknowledged that it's not enough, or it's not good enough for us, having regard to the reality of our workplaces today and the aspirations of the workforces. We all are entitled to a safe workplace, regardless of our gender. So what do we, right now, if there were to be, cases like, for instance, just 2 days ago, there was an article in the newspaper about a male intern who filed a report, who filed a complaint against one of his seniors in the organization. It's a tech company in Bangalore. And, I believe that the company was a little slow to take action. I can't comment because I don't know too much about it. But, he seemed very distressed. He seemed very, upset and helpless at what he had to go through. And so I think that's another thing we have to acknowledge, right? That sexual harassment is so often the gender and the attraction or whatever is secondary. It's more the power play. It's more getting to exploit someone because of the position that you hold. And so, a male intern is probably easy game for someone who wants to use their power to exploit someone else. It's a very, very unfortunate complaint, very unfortunate state of affairs. Samarth, I'd really like to bring you in here to talk a little bit about, so having seen that this is the situation today, what are workplaces doing in case, for example, a male employee comes forward with a complaint? Is there something that internal committees can do in the absence of clarity under the legal framework?
Thank you. Thank you for that question. Yes, I'll take off from where you left just a few seconds back, that increasingly the complaints are not only about men against women or women against men, it's also about the same-sex people being aggrieved. And these questions have been asked. Another senior trainer from Bombay also asked me the same question, where the issue was about same-sex, the men, a man being harassed by another man. So now in our policies, which I draft for the corporates, for the organizations, I not only make it gender neutral, but I also make it so that it addresses the issue of same-sex harassments, and also beyond the question of gender neutralized or sexual orientation. It's important because as a lot of people come out openly, accept their traits or orientations, it's important to also evolve with times for organizations and for workspaces to be aware of the recent trends. That being said, the organization plays a very important role in addressing in a scenario where creating safe spaces are concerned. Now, the inquiry committees at the onset of a complaint is supposed to give the opportunity for the aggrieved person, whoever it is, to have a conciliation at his or her choice. Conciliation cannot be imposed upon by the inquiry committees. It's the option of the aggrieved person. This is where a lot of clarity and a lot of confusion can be sorted. Most of the complaints, I'm told by people, by senior trainers across the country, most of the complaints are not sexual complaints in the sense that the complaints do not have a sexual overtone or an undertone to it. Most of the complaints which is being filed by the aggrieved people are mostly about employee misconduct at workspaces. This should be nipped in the bud. How can organizations address this issue? Organizations have been actively creating the awareness programs and sensitization programs. Now, what is to be done to address the issue of false complaints or to bring in more clarity into the subject? When the awareness sessions are happening, even I do the trainings, but what happens invariably or by lapse of error in judgment is, we in passing mention for false complaints, the person who has complained will be dealt with by this in the same yardstick as a person who has committed, as the person who has actually committed the crime. But we don't mention how important it is or how serious or how grave an issue it is when a false complaint is filed. So it's important during all the sessions and policy trainings, we educate the employees that false complaints will be strictly dealt with. Now, for organizations, one more important issue comes in. What is the level of proof required for organizations if an action is to be taken against a false complaint? Now, the yardstick or the burden of proof when it comes to dealing with a respondent, it is much lesser. In a given complaint, the organizations inquiring into a complaint should go into the prima facie case of the complainant, on the face of it, to the records and to the witness statements, prove a case of sexual harassment if there is an element of sexual undertone or an overtone in it. Once it is proved, they can deal with the respondent, but with the same powers which the Act gives. What if a false complaint is there? False complaint goes through a different mechanism. False complaint, if it has to be proved to be false, the level of proof required should be a slight degree higher than dealing with a regular complaint of sexual harassment against a respondent, because we are actually addressing the issue of false complaint. We are taking action against the complainant herself or himself.
Understood. Yes.
Organization should be mindful of that part.
Sure. Yeah. So false complaints, definitely, I think that, it is something that we have to be mindful of, that there should not be any misuse of the legal provisions. But I think, if we can, I would just, address this to the panel at large, because, the question which I was really interested in was around, men, if a male employee faces harassment and wants to seek redressal, is there a mechanism? Can they go to the IC? If I can put it a little simply here,
gender neutral laws, where any organization having gender neutral policies, a male employee can address the same way a woman would approach the IC.
However, the IC is given the statutory power under the POSH law to look into complaints by women, right? So I think that's the tricky part which we have to examine.
Statute will subserve the purpose of IC. IC can go beyond the statute. Of course, the statute is a base. Statute is a foundation. The IC policies can go beyond the statute. Like if the IC says aggrieved person has to be a woman, the internal policies of a company can address the issue of women as well as men, can extend the scope. It cannot take away the scope given by the statute, but it can go beyond and extend the scope of the statute.
Just add to that, Amulya, I think whilst the IC can investigate, and that is solely dependent on the policy of the organization. If the organization does not have a gender neutral policy, then the IC cannot take up those complaints. But if the organization has a gender neutral policy, whilst the IC can take up the complaint, there are certain points that needs to be kept in mind, and there is an inherent conflict, each time it comes up, because when we're talking about statutory authority given to the IC, the IC has been authorized to sort of act as the civil court, which means they can examine witnesses under oath. They can sort of, ask them to produce documents. They can mandate that they be present. But having said that, the statute has given that authority for a very specific purpose, which is for hearing complaints that may be filed by aggrieved women. So whether the IC can act whilst they can listen to complaints and hear those, can they act as a civil court and extend all those powers is something that is, subject to debate.
And just to add to that, there is also a restriction to the extent to which such appeals will be entertained by the district courts, or for that matter, courts existent in India, because the title of the statute itself delineates the locus, and it says protection of women against sexual harassment at workplace. So it clearly says that the aggrieved person is an aggrieved, has to be an aggrieved woman. On the other hand, the respondents, the perpetrator's gender has not been specified, and therefore we have cases like Malvika Chatterjee, in which the Calcutta High Court stated that since the gender or sex of the respondent has not been specified, it can very well be a female perpetrator as well. But in that case also, the victim was a woman, so it was a woman to woman harassment.
Yeah.
But the problems will arise, of course, beyond the powers of the IC, or for that purpose, the IC also and the organization also has to work within the frameworks of the primary statute.
Yeah.
To add to it, just imagine if the situation where the IC is not empowered to go into cases filed by men. All organizations will certainly have policies to address misconduct, employee misconduct.
Yes, yes.
So organizations can always go under it in the absence of laws having gender neutral policies. ICs can always go under misconduct laws and take a disciplinary action against the employee.
Great. So I think this brings us to that point where we have to, acknowledge that there is a gap, right? And that there are complaints that are coming from persons other than women. So it could be people in beyond the gender binary. It could be men. We are talking about a large section of the workforce which may have to go under maybe more generic provisions under code of conduct, maybe where the procedure is not so clearly set out, where it does not talk about, rights such as, confidentiality, anti-retaliation. Having said that, this is where, it becomes useful to draft a very comprehensive and thoughtful gender neutral policy. So I think the position that we at KelpHR take is that you can have a gender neutral policy which states that, everyone, which has a statement that everyone, regardless of gender, is entitled to a safe workplace, which is free from harassment. If you are a woman, you can go under the POSH law, and there's an IC. And if you're not a woman, you can go to the disciplinary committee or a grievance committee, whatever it is that you have in your organization, and a similar process will be followed. The idea is to ensure that everyone has access to the same kind of judicial or quasi-judicial mechanism and can expect the same kind of process. But there's an interesting question here in the chats, and that's around appeal provision, right? The POSH Act talks about the right to appeal, pursuant to any verdict returned by the internal committee. And the question here is, suppose a male employee comes forward with a complaint, and they are not happy with the resolution provided by the disciplinary committee. Can they file an appeal? And I think Madhura, if I'm not mistaken, we had a couple of other people who were interested to speak on this topic. If they're present, we can also have maybe a small, they can answer a question, or I would put it to the panelists. And I think we have a very interesting discussion going on in the chat as well.
So we're having a situation where there is no IC policy, but to address the issue of a male employee, but a male employee does come forward and files a complaint.
Yeah, no, you're having a situation where the male employee who has filed a complaint is not happy with the resolution, and so wants to file an appeal.
In a POSH complaint, there is an appeal provision. Of course, there's an appeal provision which can be set forth. If not, most of the state governments have to notify the authorities. State government has to notify the appellate authority. In Bangalore, there's in Karnataka, of course, there's the discussion that the labor officer is the appellate authority to deal with POSH complaints in the absence of a specific appellate authority in the POSH policy itself. some of the POSH policy itself has an appellate authority, which is the management, senior level management or the global level management person.
Right. I think this is also a subject of debate because some courts have held that this is actually not tenable under the POSH law, that the IC is the only authority which has been statutorily endowed with the power to look into the POSH cases. So it's interesting. So you see, there's a lot of ambiguity. There's a lot of, we could do with a lot more clarity when it comes to interpreting these provisions.
It's just a 10-year-old law, so many areas. In fact, just the other day, I think it was last year or so, me and another friend of mine who's also a senior lawyer, we tried to propose some changes and amendments to the law itself, and we wanted to get this table before the parliament through one of the members of parliament, because there are so many issues which is unresolved, which is one of them is the appellate authority being in existence, and the powers of the appellate authority. Yes.
Panelists, any thoughts on the appeal aspect? Do you think there is, can they go to the labor courts in the absence of a clarity under POSH law itself? Dr. Sandhya Advani in the chat says, if the organization is being governed by service rules, the appeal process followed is different. Please mute yourself. I don't know who's speaking. Yeah, if the organization is being governed by service rules, the appeal process followed is different. So I think this would go under the Industrial Disputes Act, if I'm not wrong.
Can I just clarify this?
Yes, please.
Amulya, hi.
Hi.
So the thing is that in case an organization is governed by service rules, for example, banks, then the process followed is different. So then the IC, once it comes to the finding, it will only give a finding whether this person is guilty, not guilty. They do not come up with a recommendation. After that, it goes to the disciplinary authority, who will then send out a show cause notice to the respondent saying that why action should not be taken. And then the respondent is heard. The entire thing is not, the disciplinary authority does not have a second inquiry as such, but just sends out some notice saying why action should not be taken. And the person is given an opportunity to put forth his reply. After that, the disciplinary authority decides on what is the quantum of punishment, whether it's a major penalty or a minor penalty. So this is how it goes as per service rules. If an organization is not governed by service rules, then the appellate authority is the authority which is prescribed under the Industrial Employment Standing Orders Act 1946. Yes. And that is generally the industrial court. And in case if an organization is not governed by IESO, that is Industrial Employment Standing Orders Act, it goes as a writ petition before the High Court. So this is the process for the appeal.
Right. So there is a legal process that can be followed, even if you are not covered under the POSH Act. So where the POSH Act talks about the provision for appeal, these provisions are covered if you're coming under service rules of if you're coming under an organization that has service rules.
No, just to clarify, see, all this appeal process is mentioned in the POSH Act. Now, in case if it's a male who is experiencing harassment, that complaint gets taken up under Code of Conduct. You have a disciplinary committee or a grievance committee which looks into the complaint. However, there is no provision as such for appeal to be filed by a man experiencing sexual harassment, unless the organization has some kind of
service rules.
No, unless the organization has some kind of a policy for appeal process. They have an appeal process included in their policy. So as such, service rules are those government organizations, banks will come under service rules. So this is all as far as POSH is concerned. When it is a complaint by a male, it gets handled under Code of Conduct. But whether can the male not satisfied file an appeal, it's a question mark. If an organization has some kind of a provision for internal appeal, yes, it would go as for that. Otherwise, there is no provision for appeal.
Very interesting. Thank you so much. So I think, yes, but yes, the internal appeal thing is also up for debate. There's a lot of, back and forth in the courts. So yes, I think that really shows us, where we stand today as with a lot of ambiguity, with a lot of gaps, and clearly a a lacunae in the legal framework needed to address the safety and security of our workforces on a gender inclusive and gender neutral basis. I think this is a great time to look at a few more questions. Please do share other questions on the chat as well. Dr. John Sarkar says, let's petition the government to come up with online complaints portal for men. Yes, that might help. We could first petition for a clearer law, but yes, this would also help. Anuradha says, while the Act covers only aggrieved women, organizations have the free will to adopt a gender neutral policy, so the complainant can be any gender. But just that the case will not be handled by IC, but instead by a grievance redressal cell or a code of ethics cell. On another note, if this Act is revised to be gender neutral, is it expected that POSH IC should handle all such cases? We also need to be inclusive about the LGBTQIA community. So if panelists, if you could, if anyone has a thought on this, if the Act is upgraded to be a gender neutral Act, then the POSH IC would be equipped to handle such cases, yes or no?
Maybe the question might then come up because the existing POSH policy will say the presiding officer has to be a woman. So maybe then if the Act itself is repealed or amended, then
yes, I think it says the presiding officer is a woman.
Has to be a woman. Has to be
yes,
a woman.
Yes.
So, and also the maximum number of the committee has to be women, because it primarily addressed the issue of women in the first place when it was conceptualized. Now, if it is gender neutral, perhaps there will be room for equal number of representation for men and women to have an unbiased view and approach, probably.
Hopefully, it's already unbiased.
Yeah. It is.
Just to sort of add to that, apart from, whether it's equal in number or not, I think one is, of course, representation of all three genders, whether it's male, female, or the third gender should be there. The second most important thing would be sort of, the kind of training that is imparted, because if it is going to be a gender neutral policy, then what are the complaints? Because a complaint that may be filed by male gender or a third gender, a lot of training needs to be imparted as to how those complaints have to be dealt with, since right now the Act doesn't provide for that.
Just to add to that, the person who put forth the question has utilized the term LGBTQI plus community, in which only a few of the words note to gender or denote a gender, but the other terms L, G, B, they denote sexual orientation, which is very different from gender. Even if a person has a certain sexual orientation, maybe that person is gay, that person still has the freedom to identify as a woman. While at the same time, that person might have been assigned the sex of a male during the time of birth, and that person could also be gender fluid, meaning thereby that person could identify themselves as a particular gender during some part of the time and a certain other gender. So using just the terminology LGBTQI plus wouldn't fit well. Rather, the word gender inclusive would be a better terminology.
Thank you so much for that. Thank you so much. I think, Smita writes that at KelpHR, we call this the SOGISC, which is sexual orientation, gender expression and identity, and sex characteristics. So it's rather a meta, description of the ways in which we may have, varying aspects of these, rather than clubbing it as LGBTQIA. However, we know that the scholarship on this is changing every day. We're always learning. All right. So coming back to the chat, what about the new criminal laws coming into effect? So I think the question that Rohit is asking is, are the new criminal laws being a little more gender neutral? And actually, I just wanted to raise a point here that there have been debates, like in the Parliamentary Standing Committee report, even the POCSO law, which talks about, children as survivors of sexual abuse, is gender neutral. So it does not make a distinction between, boy victims and girl victims. And so I think it is an interesting question to ask: Are criminal laws changing? Because even Section 376, and I'm sorry if I don't give the right references, but our rape laws are specific currently to talking about rape as, vaginal penetration, for instance, which is very gender specific, right? And it may not cover the other, the reality again of sexual violence that is experienced by a lot of people. Any thoughts on where we could go with this? What kind of reforms we could look at for our criminal laws?
If I may, so as of now, the criminal laws are very gender specific. They identify both the gender of the perpetrator and the gender of the victim. So not just rape laws, but also sexual harassment laws 354A and not just rape, but also sexual harassment and others, such molestation, for instance, or disrobing a woman. These are very gender specific laws. So for that instance, for the relief that the male victims could get is really not included in the current as well as the reformed criminal laws. So there is no change with respect to the gender of the victim, even in the reformed laws, the changed laws that we have. So for that instance, groping a man's private parts or stroking a man's private part would not qualify as a sexual harassment. But the only recourse that might remotely be possible is of a simple hurt, and only in the condition when there is an evidence of some harm being done towards the private part. So that is very restrictive in its both its application as well as in its wording.
Thank you so much, Sanya. So I think what stood out to me when you said they have to be able to demonstrate or evidence the hurt, right? So it has to be a very violent act to cause some bruising or leave some marks. But people don't really see the emotional damage that can be caused by an act like this, right? And that is something that we are consistently leaving out of our discourse when we are talking about making more empathetic laws and making more thoughtful, legal frameworks. Thank you for that. Just a few more questions. Yeah, okay, so I think the question about the appeal was answered. Yeah, this has just been a conversation, mostly clarifying the discussions that we were having.
Amulya, if I may, just one line on the emotional aspect that you told.
Yes.
Even before reforming the laws, we might, like, the reform of the laws will take a lot of time. But before that also, we can start with providing support groups for the male victims. Not just the male victims for sexual harassment at workplace, but male victims in general. Let us also look at the Protection of Women Against Domestic Violence Act. That is also very gender neutral. Gender biased. We don't even talk about the remote possibility of men being victims of domestic violence. So just providing safety to them through support groups or reassurance, because there is recent statistics that also shows that during the time of COVID, number of suicides committed by men were on the rise. That also speaks a lot about the emotional trauma, mental trauma that such male victims go through, also because they cannot speak about it. If they go ahead and tell that I was sexually harassed, or I was experiencing domestic violence, or any such act was conducted against me, then people, first of all, they won't believe. Second, they would say that it is going against your gendered role, and that you are fragile and you are more woman-like. See, the whole idea of creating a safe space is a prerequisite to creating a amendment in the existing laws.
Right. I totally agree with Sanya. I'd like to come in if I have some time. Just a minute. Quick thing.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, so there was an interesting discussion about having support groups. Now, you also mentioned POCSO cases. So POCSO POCSO deals with the voiceless, who are the children. The Act defines who are children are anybody below the age group of 18 are children. So for children, the law was different because they're children, they can't speak for themselves. So they had special laws which would identify and which would address the issue of child sexual harassment. Now, for men, the support groups, there was this interesting study done by a German university. German university called out for people who are, this was a different approach. It didn't reach out to the victims. It reached out to people who have a mental predisposition to commit sexual offenses. They said, if these perpetrators, if you have an inclination to have a physical attraction, or if there is some mental predisposition towards a child or pedophilia, for instance, or towards a certain gender, to use force against the other in a sexual way, please come to us. We can help you out with it. There was a study done by German university. It took some time for people to come out. People did go out, and I'm told a lot of people benefited. In India, recently, I'm told there's an organization in Pune which handles such cases where child sexual abusers are invited because they themselves identify that, yes, there is an issue to be addressed, but they are not equipped to address their own mental predispositions. So this is one such support group where people who are disposed to commit crime or creating such disturbance in workspaces or in other spaces of house or society or out in the public, they can approach and they can actively participate and take at least address their own issues in the mind. This is for people who identify that there is an issue to be addressed.
Very interesting. Yeah. I mean, I think ultimately we have to look at having a more reformative approach to issues that we see in society rather than punitive, because we have to learn to live with each other. We can just all aim to coexist in a harmonious way so that we don't bring harm to anyone. I think if we can think about and I think that the point about support groups is very good that way, that there can be extra legal solutions or extra legal modes of finding some kind of solace, some kind of support or understanding that they may be seeking and not finding in our judicial systems. Wow. So I think this was a very, very interesting discussion, very, very important subject. I thank you all panelists for your valuable time and your insights. I learned a lot, and I would, it would be so great to continue this conversation. So please write to us. I mean, all the audience members, you can always write to us. We are at KelpHR, info at KelpHR, and we can keep these conversations going. I mean, there is like Samarth mentioned, we are just 10 years into this law. We're going to find so much more to maybe pick bones, in it. We're going to find so much to improve and so much to brainstorm and try and make this law better, try and make our workplaces better. And if I can just take, thank you so much, panelists, each one of you. Really appreciate you giving us your time and your expertise.
Thank you, Amulya, for your wonderful moderation of the session.
Thank you.
And the wonderful questions by all the participants.
Yes, thank you so much. So this recording will be available on our YouTube page. You can just go to KelpHR on YouTube. While you're here, I think I would just like to add one more thing that, at KelpHR, we're running something called the POSH Awards. This is for to platform and recognize those organizations that are doing something that are going a little beyond compliance, trying to create a culture of safety in their workplace. If you're interested, again, please reach out to us. We have a separate website for that, and I'll just drop it in the chat. Okay, so I think we're on time. Again, thanks everybody. And thank you audience members as well. Very, very insightful conversation. At some point I got lost in the chats and I couldn't come out of it. So yes, this was great. Thanks everyone.